The taxi idled under a flickering street lamp, its engine humming like a distant thought. Rain tapped gently against the glass, tracing slow rivers down the windshield. The driver stepped out, older, hesitant, his cap soaked through. He didn't speak at first. Just handed the soldier a crumpled, rain-stained note. "He gave me this," he said. Said it was, for his dad. The soldier's hand shook as he unfolded it. 6 words. Scribbled in pencil. "I'm sorry I ran. Don't look." He froze. The ink had bled from water, or maybe tears. His knees buckled. Silence swallowed the night. The house was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the hollow kind, like the walls had forgotten how to echo laughter. When I stepped in, my boots left a trail of rainwater behind me. The floor creaked under the weight of my breath. My duffel dropped by the door, and for a moment, I just stood there, hoping to hear his voice call out from the hallway. Something like, "Dad," or even just the quick slap of socks on wood. Nothing. The living room sat untouched. A plastic action figure lay on its side beneath the coffee table, its arm bent back unnaturally. The TV was off, its reflection staring back at me like a dark window. I moved upstairs. His door was slightly ajar. One of the curtains fluttered lazily from an open window. Wind slipped in, cold and damp, carrying the scent of asphalt and rain. His bed was made. Too perfectly. The kind of neatness that doesn't come from routine, but from a goodbye. My wife was in the kitchen when I found her. Still in her robe, hands gripping a mug she hadn't sipped. She looked up, startled by the sight of me, or maybe just startled that I was real. "I thought, I didn't know you'd be back today. Where is he?" I asked, voice low. "I thought he was with you." Her mug slipped from her hand, shattering against the tile. Tea spread like a stain, curling around her feet. We searched the house again. Pointless. Every room said the same thing: he left. In his closet, the absence was louder than anything else. A jacket missing. His favorite sneakers. And that small backpack with the green zipper, the one he always carried on school trips. Gone. My hands found a toy tank on his nightstand. I stared at it, thumbing the chipped paint. He used to pretend it was mine, said it was Captain Dad's. He'd push it across the floor, whispering missions to imaginary troops. Now it sat alone, turret pointing at the window like it wanted to follow him. I didn't hear anything, my wife kept saying. No door. No sound. I don't understand. There was no note. No message. No trail of teenage angst or rebellion. Just a void where a boy used to be. I checked the porch cameras. One of them blinked, dead. The other caught only shadows, a figure slipping out in the early morning fog. Backpack slung low. Head down. Him. I paused the footage, zooming in on his face. Blurry, but unmistakably his. The timestamp said 4:13 a.m. He was gone before the sun even knew it was morning. My hands shook as I rewound the footage again. And again. Watching my son disappear into the mist while the world slept. I called his friends. None had seen him. His school said he'd been distant. Quiet. Withdrawn, the counselor called it. She had meant to call us, but hadn't yet. No one saw it coming. Not even me. And that's what hollowed me out the most. I sat on his bed that night, the air in his room still holding traces of him. His books. The faint smell of shampoo. Crumpled paper under the desk. I opened the drawer. Empty. But taped under the tabletop, a taxi receipt, faded, barely legible. One line stood out. Drop-off requested, no return trip. No address. Just a cross street. One I didn't recognize. I called dispatch the next morning, posing as someone who'd left something in a cab. They hesitated, but gave me a list of taxi logs from that day. I scanned them, heart in my throat, until I found it. The driver's name was scribbled in pen. Carlos. The ride timestamp matched the camera footage. I stared at that name, not sure if I was angry, relieved, or terrified. He had gotten in a car. Paid in cash. Told the driver not to bring him back. He had planned this. Planned it, while I was hundreds of miles away. I pressed the receipt to my forehead, trying to steady my breath. I couldn't stop replaying the times I'd missed, birthdays over a video call, school events sent in photos, promises made in rushed goodbyes. How long had he been waiting for me to notice? How many nights had he lain in this bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd come back the same, or at all? Downstairs, my wife sat by the window, holding one of his old sweatshirts. She didn't speak. Just rocked slightly, eyes locked on the road as if willing him to appear. We were both trapped in the same storm, a storm of what-ifs, regrets, and deafening silence. I stared at the receipt again. Carlos. The driver. That's where I'd start. Because whatever road my son had taken, it wasn't one he should have walked alone. The taxi garage smelled like old coffee, engine grease, and something faintly metallic, the scent of stories that never made it home. A fan rotated lazily above the front desk, doing little to cut through the August heat. My boots felt heavier than usual, each step echoing on the concrete floor like a countdown. Carlos Mendoza? I asked the clerk. He barely looked up from his crossword. Which shift? Early. 2 days ago. He flipped through a logbook, tapping his pen along the columns. Garage 3. Cab number 218. Just came off the line. Might still be wiping her down. I found him hunched beside the open door of a yellow cab, cleaning the floor mats with methodical patience. His shirt was untucked, hair streaked with silver, eyes tired, like someone who'd been carrying more than he let on. Carlos? He turned, startled. His eyes scanned my face, pausing slightly on the uniform. I'm not in trouble, am I? No, I said, pulling out my wallet. I held up the receipt. You drove a boy 2 nights ago. He's my son. His expression tightened. I watched his throat move as he swallowed. You the soldier? I nodded slowly. Carlos stood straight, brushing his hands off on a rag. He said you'd come. I didn't breathe. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and folded, sealed in a Ziploc to keep it dry. I almost didn't take him, he said. Middle of the night. Alone. Looked scared. But he had cash and a stare I couldn't argue with. I took the note with trembling fingers. The same handwriting. His. This one was shorter than the first. If he asks, tell him I was brave. My throat tightened around something sharp and invisible. Carlos watched me with a softness that felt out of place in that garage. He said he didn't want to be found. That it was his turn to disappear. He's 12, I said, barely above a whisper. Carlos looked away. Yeah. I know. I gripped the edge of the car door to stay upright. My mind was a blur of images, scraped knees, bedtime stories, the way he used to sneak into our bed during thunderstorms. He say where he was going? Not exactly. Just said it was where the brave ones go. That doesn't mean anything. To a kid, maybe it does. I stepped back, the concrete suddenly colder underfoot. Carlos hesitated before speaking again. He left something in the back seat. I thought about turning it in, but figured you'd come first. He reached into the cab and retrieved a crumpled grocery bag. Inside, a plastic army helmet, the kind you buy at toy stores, and a flashlight wrapped in a sock. The helmet had his name written inside in marker. Ben. Carlos handed it over gently, like it might break. He looked like he'd rehearsed this, he said. Like he'd been planning it for a while. I nodded slowly, heart caught somewhere between grief and rage. Not at Carlos. Not even at Ben. At myself. He was quiet most of the ride, Carlos added. Except once. He asked me if heroes ever quit being heroes. What did you say? I told him sometimes they need a break, but they never stop caring. I swallowed hard. The words cut deeper than I expected. I dropped him off at 7th and Miro. Corner near that abandoned hardware store. That wasn't even near our neighborhood. Why there? Carlos just shook his head. Didn't say. Just told me to drive and not look back. I gripped the helmet tighter. A slow realization settled in. This wasn't just running away. This was a mission. Something in his mind, in the mind of a boy raised on bedtime war stories and half-truths about what I did when I was away, had told him that disappearing was how you earned stripes. Maybe he thought that's how I became strong. That disappearing made you important. Brave. I looked at Carlos again. Why did you help him? His eyes flickered. I have a daughter. She ran once. Just for a day, but it changes you. We stood there in silence, two men haunted by the same fear. I should have seen this coming, I whispered. There were signs. Carlos nodded, slow and sad. Always are. We just don't always want to believe them. I walked back toward my car, helmet in hand, the note tucked carefully into my chest pocket. Carlos called out just before I reached the door. Hey. I turned. If he asked me to find you, then he wasn't really running. He was hoping you'd chase him. That line stayed with me longer than anything else. Long after I left the garage, after I'd mapped the route to 7th and Miro, after I parked near the broken windows of the old hardware store, it stayed. He didn't want to disappear. He wanted to be found. The corner of 7th and Miro didn't belong to the city anymore. It had been forgotten, claimed by rust, weeds, and silence. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, but watched. The hardware store stood like a collapsed memory. Its windows were boarded up with plywood faded to gray. A tilted, closed sign still hung in the doorway, barely visible behind a layer of dust and spiderwebs. I parked across the street and waited, watching the alley beside it. Rain had come through here, just enough to make the concrete glisten, just enough to erase anything soft. But not everything. I stepped out, heart pounding beneath my jacket, and walked toward the alley. The walls on either side were close, claustrophobic. A single flickering security light buzzed overhead. On the left wall, near a rusty drainpipe, I saw it. Chalk. Faint, barely there. But still visible. A series of lines, drawn low on the bricks. Not words. Symbols. A crude figure, stick arms, a round head, a backpack drawn in blue chalk. And next to it, in yellow, a bigger figure holding the smaller one's hand. It wasn't a message. It was a memory. My breath caught. I touched the drawing with my fingers, feeling the texture of the wall beneath the chalk. The colors smudged slightly under my touch, but I left them. I didn't want to erase anything. A bit further down, something else. A handprint. Small. Pressed flat against the red brick, dusted faintly in white. A child's. I knelt beside it, pressing my own hand just inches away. Mine dwarfed his. I wanted to scream, to shout his name down that alley until it bounced back to me in an echo. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because the echo might never come. Behind a dented trash bin, I found it. A torn page, ripped from his sketchbook. Edges frayed, damp from rain, but still intact. A drawing. A little boy in a toy helmet, standing alone, holding a flashlight like a sword. The darkness behind him was scribbled in thick, heavy strokes. But he stood facing it, not running. I swallowed hard. My throat ached. He wasn't hiding. He was proving something. To me. To himself. Maybe to both. A cough startled me. I turned, hand instinctively brushing the inside of my coat. Old habits. Just a man. Homeless, by the look. Thin frame, layers of tattered clothing, watching me from the end of the alley. I stood slowly. Did you see a boy? About 12. Brown hair. Wears a green backpack. The man squinted at me. This ain't a place for kids. He was here. The man glanced at the wall, then nodded faintly. He drew those. Few nights ago. My pulse kicked up. Was he alone? The man hesitated. Mostly. One time I saw him talking to someone, could have been another kid. Might have been older. Did he say anything to you? He scratched at his chin. Said he was waiting. I asked for what, and he just said. For someone to remember. That line. It hollowed me out. Do you know where he went? The man pointed toward the far end of the alley. That way. Through the fence. But the buildings back there, most are sealed up. Dangerous. I nodded and slipped him a folded bill. He took it with trembling hands, murmuring something I didn't catch. The chain-link fence had a hole at the bottom, just big enough for a kid to crawl through. I got on my knees and looked inside. Abandoned lots. Graffiti-tagged walls. A row of skeletal buildings, shells of what once were homes or businesses. Windows shattered. Doors missing. Everything sagged, like the structures were too tired to stand anymore. But one thing caught my eye. A piece of cloth. Tangled in the fence. Green. A torn strap, just like the one from his backpack. My fingers tightened around the wire. He'd been here. I crawled through. Inside, the silence was thicker. Even the wind seemed afraid to speak. I moved slowly, scanning the ground for footprints, bits of paper, anything that felt like him. At the base of one of the buildings, beside a rusted metal door, was a pile of sticks. Arranged in a circle. At the center, a single toy soldier. Face down. Buried halfway in dirt. My chest ached. I crouched and picked it up, brushing it off. The paint was chipped. A crack ran through the torso. Broken. But still here. Still fighting. Inside the building was dark. My flashlight cut through the shadows, revealing water-damaged walls and a floor littered with debris. But near the far wall, I saw something. A blanket. Rolled up. Beside it, an empty juice box. A few candy wrappers. And a small notebook. I opened it carefully. First page, a rough sketch of a man in uniform. Not just any uniform. Mine. He had drawn me. But with his own helmet on. The two of us standing together. Page after page, more drawings. A map of the city with stars marked in chalk blue. A list of words. Brave. Found. Safe. Wait. Dad. No full sentences. Just fragments. But they were enough. He had been here. Sleeping on cold floors. Eating scraps. Drawing me from memory. Waiting. I sat down hard against the wall, the notebook in my lap, and let the silence settle around me. I whispered into the dark, not expecting an answer. Ben, please come back. Only silence replied. But somewhere in that silence, I could feel it. An echo. Faint, but real. And it was him. It was the kind of name that didn't appear on maps. Just whispered by those who'd heard it, and believed it. The Whisper House. A woman at the shelter mentioned it when I showed her my son's sketchbook. Her eyes darted sideways like the words alone might cause trouble. She lowered her voice and told me kids who ran away sometimes ended up there, an old house past the rail line, on the edge of the industrial strip. No one really checks it, she said. Because no one really wants to. I found it just before sunset. The tracks curved around a row of abandoned warehouses, rust bleeding through their seams. Behind them, half hidden by overgrown brush and vines, stood the house. 2 stories. Faded blue siding. Most of the windows were shattered. The porch sagged in the middle, like it was tired of pretending to hold anything up. A tattered bedsheet hung like a curtain from the upstairs window, swaying in the breeze. I stood still for a while, heart pounding. Something about it made me feel like I was trespassing somewhere sacred, or cursed. The front door creaked open with just a nudge. Inside, the air was musty. The floorboards moaned beneath my boots. But what struck me first was the silence, not empty, but filled with breath. Breath that wasn't mine. Faint footsteps above me. A cough. A child's voice, not speaking, just humming. I moved slowly. The walls were covered in writing. Not vandalism. Not anger. Names. Hundreds of names, written in chalk and marker and crayon. Spelled wrong, sometimes just initials. Each one carefully placed, like a child's version of a monument. Beside many of them, drawings. Faces, dogs, stars, a pair of eyes. Some names had a line underneath. Some were circled in hearts. Others had been scratched out. And on one wall near the stairs, I saw it. Ben. Drawn in red marker, the letters uneven but intentional. Above it, a crude sketch of a toy helmet. My breath caught. He had been here. I followed the humming. Up the stairs, each step protesting under my weight. At the top, a hallway, dim and narrow. Rooms with open doors, mattresses on the floor, sleeping bags, scattered shoes. Evidence of small lives, pieced together like nests. The humming came from the last room. I didn't rush. I don't know why. Maybe I was afraid to find him. Maybe I was more afraid I wouldn't. When I reached the doorway, I paused. A girl sat cross-legged by the window, maybe 10 years old, wrapping a thread around her finger like a ring. She looked up when she saw me. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't speak. I raised my hand slightly. I'm not here to hurt anyone. Then you shouldn't be here, she said, voice flat. I'm looking for my son. His name is Ben. He was here. She stared at me for a long time. Then finally, she nodded. He left something. She reached under a blanket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Handed it to me like it might burn her. I unfolded it slowly. If I don't come back, it's because I'm not ready yet. But I'm not gone. Not really. At the bottom, in smaller handwriting, tell him I remember the flashlight game. My legs buckled slightly, and I sat against the doorframe. The flashlight game. A ritual we made up when he was little, during power outages or nights when he couldn't sleep. I'd shine the beam on the ceiling and trace shapes. Planes. Dinosaurs. Secret maps. He'd laugh and try to catch them. He remembered. Did he say where he was going? I asked the girl, voice cracking. She shook her head. But he didn't cry. Most kids cry. Why do they come here? I asked. Why stay in a place like this? She looked down at her hand, the thread digging into her finger. Because here, no one tells you to be okay when you're not. I didn't know what to say to that. Before I could speak again, she stood. He said you'd find the map. What map? She walked past me, silent as a shadow, and gestured to a doorway halfway down the hall. Inside was a bare room with a single candle flickering near the window. The walls were covered in pages, notebook sheets, cardboard scraps, torn flyers. Taped up. Pinned down. Drawn over in marker and colored pencil. It was a map. Of the city. Or, at least, what a child believed the city to be. Neighborhoods renamed. Alleys labeled with symbols. Certain blocks shaded in red. Others in green. Arrows. Stars. Circles with question marks. At the top of the map was a title, scrawled in thick black crayon. The Safe Zones. I stepped closer. Some stars had names, initials mostly. But one stood out. BN. Circled twice. Arrow pointing southeast. He had marked a place. One more place. My fingers traced the paper, careful not to tear anything. I whispered, he left me a trail. The girl stood behind me, watching. Some kids don't want to be found. But he left signs. I looked at her. Why help me? She shrugged. Because he shared his crackers. We stood there, surrounded by a map built from crayons and memory, and I realized something. Ben wasn't running away. He was building something. A world. A system. His own rescue plan. He just wanted to see if I'd follow it. And I would. Step by step. Zone by zone. The house was quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that comes from peace, but the thick, suffocating stillness of something waiting to be said. It had been 3 days since I stood in the whisper house. Since the girl with thread around her finger handed me a note from my son. Since I saw the wall map marked with stars and arrows, one of them bearing his name like a beacon. Now, back home, I was sitting on the edge of Ben's bed. The mattress dipped under me like it still remembered his weight. The air smelled like dust and memory. I hadn't touched anything. Not the shelf with his soccer trophies. Not the desk with his scattered pencils. Not the coat still hanging on the back of his chair. I didn't know why I opened the drawer. Maybe because I was tired of waiting for signs. Maybe because part of me still believed the boy I knew had left something behind. Something for me. The drawer came out stiff, resisting like a secret. Inside, pencils, a broken headphone jack, a half-solved Rubik's Cube. I shifted them aside, fingers brushing the bottom. Hollow. I tapped once. Wood. Tapped again. Dull thud. False bottom. I pried gently at the corners until it gave way with a soft snap. And there, nestled in the space beneath, was a bundle of folded paper tied together with a shoelace. Letters. Dozens of them. I untied the bundle and opened the top one. Dear Dad. I know you're busy. I know you're important. Mom says you save people. But sometimes I wish you'd come home just to eat spaghetti. A small laugh caught in my throat. I wiped my eyes with my sleeve and opened another. Dear Dad. You said heroes don't cry. I tried not to. But it's hard when it rains inside your chest. Page after page, drawings, misspelled words, taped corners. Some were angry. Some apologetic. Most just aching. Letters written to me. Letters never sent. Dear Dad. I heard you were coming back for my birthday. I stayed up. I didn't blow out my candles until midnight. Dear Dad. Sometimes I wonder if the bad guys you fight look like me. Is that why you stay away? My hands trembled as I flipped through them. I wanted to stop. But I couldn't. I owed him that. I reached one that had been folded twice, the edges softer from wear. Dear Dad. I'm going to be like you. I'm going to be strong. I'll disappear and do something brave. Then you'll be proud. Maybe I'll even get a medal. The words blurred on the page as the tears finally fell. He wasn't running away from home. He was running toward me. Toward the version of me he thought I wanted him to become. He was trying to earn my attention the only way he knew how, by vanishing. I sat there for a long time, surrounded by the weight of words he never gave me. Words he probably thought I was too busy to read, too distant to understand. I had spent years trying to protect him from the things I saw overseas. From the pain. The grief. The emptiness of coming home with less than you left with. But I hadn't realized. I'd made him feel like he was one of those things. Disposable. Silent. Easy to leave behind. Downstairs, I heard the soft clink of my wife washing dishes. A quiet act. Normal. As if the world hadn't shifted inside these pages. I stood and walked to the hallway, still holding the letters like they might vanish if I let go. She turned when I entered the kitchen, eyes wary. I found them, I said. She didn't ask what. She just waited. I placed the stack of letters gently on the table. She picked up one, then another, her hand starting to tremble like mine had. We didn't speak. There wasn't room for blame. Only truth. I didn't know, she whispered. He never said any of this to me. Because I think he thought it would break you. She nodded, tears running freely now. He didn't want to hurt you, I said. He just didn't want to disappear quietly. We sat across from each other at the table as the sky darkened behind the windows. Outside, the rain had started again, soft against the glass, the kind of rain that doesn't wash things away, just reminds you they're still there. I pulled out the last letter. One that hadn't been finished. It stopped mid-sentence. Dear Dad. If I don't come back, I want you to know I'm not mad. I just wanted to see if you'd. It ended there. No period. No signature. Just a curl of a word that trailed off like his breath had been pulled in another direction. I folded it gently, placed it on top of the stack. Then I stood. I know where he's going next. My wife looked up, hopeful and terrified all at once. There's a mark on that map. A place circled twice. Southeast Rail Yard. He called it a safe zone. You really think he wants to be found? I thought of the letters. The drawings. The chalk wall at the Whisper House. The flashlight game. I think, I said softly, he's waiting for me to come find him. The Southeast Rail Yard was dying. Train cars sat rusting along twisted tracks, their once yellow shells dulled to brown and orange. A chain-link fence wrapped around the property like a scar, patched in places with wire and wooden boards. Beyond it, the world had forgotten this place, but it hadn't forgotten itself. I stepped through a gap where the fence had given up. Each footstep crunched against gravel and broken glass. Graffiti covered every flat surface, names, monsters, half-finished faces with hollow eyes. A group of crows scattered from the rooftop, their wings slicing the air. Then I saw him. Not Ben. Another boy. Thin. Barefoot. Shirt too big for his frame, hanging off one shoulder like it didn't belong to him, or anyone. He was sitting under the shell of a cargo car, knees pulled to his chest, drawing on the ground with a stick. He didn't run when I approached. Just looked up, eyes guarded but curious. You lost? He asked. No, I said gently. But I think I'm close to someone who is. He squinted. You a cop? I shook my head. Father. He looked at my boots, then at my face. Something in his shoulders shifted, like he decided I was safe enough. You looking for the kid with the green backpack? My breath caught. Yes. His name's Ben. The boy nodded. He was here. Gave me socks. And part of a granola bar. When? 2 days ago. Maybe 3. I dunno. Time's weird here. Do you know where he went? He shrugged. Said he had one more place to check. A place he dreamed about. He drew it before he left. Do you still have the drawing? The boy pointed behind him. I followed his gaze to the inside wall of the cargo car. Taped there, fluttering slightly in the breeze, was a piece of paper. I stepped closer. It was a sketch. Rough. Childlike. But clear. A hill. A bench. 2 figures sitting, one small, one larger, facing a tree with a broken swing. A memory. I recognized it immediately. When he was 7, we visited a park out near the outskirts of town. It had a hill, a wooden bench at the top, and a swing tied to a tree that leaned like it was bowing. That day, we sat and watched the sky turn purple. He asked me if clouds ever got tired. I told him maybe they did, that's why they moved so slow. That was the last time we'd gone somewhere just the 2 of us. He had drawn it from memory. I knelt beside the boy. Did he say anything before he left? He nodded. Said he missed the wind up there. And that he was gonna sit where you Saturday. Tears pressed behind my eyes. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small flashlight, the one he left behind in the cab. I turned it on, letting the beam land on the wall beside his drawing. A slow arc. A silent promise. The boy watched quietly. He talked about you. Said you used to shine light monsters away. I smiled faintly. That was the idea. He said you didn't talk much. But you listened better than anyone. I swallowed hard. I didn't think he remembered. The boy stood and walked over to a plastic bag tucked beneath the train car. He rummaged through it, then handed me a shoelace. Green. Frayed. The tip melted. It was his. Said to give it to you if you ever came. I held it in my hand like it was glass. He had left breadcrumbs for me. Not because he wanted to be gone, but because he wanted to be followed. You got kids? The boy asked suddenly. I nodded. Just one. He looked down at his bare feet. I had a brother once. Don't know where he is now. We stood there a moment longer, the weight of things unspoken between us. Then I crouched and unlaced one of my boots. I pulled off a pair of thick army-grade socks and handed them to him. He looked surprised. They'll get dirty. They're supposed to, I said. He smiled, barely, and took them. As I turned to leave, I paused. What's your name? He hesitated. Then, Miles. Miles, I said, trying to hold that name in place. If you ever want to be found, I'll come back. He didn't reply, but he didn't look away either. Back in the car, I unfolded the map from the Whisper House and drew a new star over the rail yard. Beside it, I wrote Miles. Then I circled a new spot, the hill. The bench. The broken swing. His last safe zone. That's where I'd find him. Or lose him forever. The road to the hill was half memory, half guesswork. It sat at the city's edge, past old farms and forgotten playgrounds. Somewhere between where people stop living and where stories start fading. I hadn't been here in 5 years, not since Ben was small enough to fall asleep on my shoulder and light enough to carry up the slope without breaking a sweat. Now, the trees had grown wild, branches clawing at the sky. The wooden sign near the entrance had fallen sideways, its letters faded to shadows. The trail up the hill was still there, barely. Dirt, dust, and the soft green of new weeds. I followed it slowly. Every step kicked up the past, the way he used to run ahead, arms out like airplane wings, the way he used to laugh when I pretended to lose him behind trees. The wind was still the same. Cool. Wide. Honest. When I reached the top, I saw it. The bench. Still there, though worn, one of its legs crooked, leaning slightly. Behind it, the tree, older, more twisted. The swing was gone. Only the frayed rope hung like an unfinished sentence. And on the bench, a toy soldier. Face up this time. Clean. I approached quietly, almost reverently, like I didn't want to scare the moment away. Beside the soldier sat a folded page. My hands trembled as I picked it up. Dad. This is where the wind didn't lie. This is where you smiled without trying. I didn't forget. I just wanted to know if you remembered too. I sat down slowly, pressing the letter to my chest. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows through the branches. Light danced across the bench, catching dust motes in the air, tiny flickers that reminded me of flashlight beams from long ago. I turned the page over. There, drawn in pencil, was the same image from the rail yard. The hill. The bench. Two figures. But this time, they weren't sitting apart. They were side by side. And beneath the drawing, in smaller letters. I left the flashlight where it started. I blinked. Where it started. My mind raced through places. Bedrooms. Bunkers. Blackouts. Then it hit me. The attic. Our attic. The first time the power went out during a storm, I'd pulled him up the ladder and shined a flashlight through the slats, making shadow puppets on the angled ceiling. He had laughed so hard he got the hiccups. That was the beginning. Of us. Of stories told in darkness. Of being brave when the lights went out. I stood from the bench, wind catching the edges of the paper in my hand. But something caught my eye. Tucked beneath the bench, a notebook. His. The same one from the Whisper House. I opened it. More sketches. More phrases. Lists. But then, something new. A plan. He had mapped out everywhere he'd gone. Marked the Whisper House. The alley. The rail yard. Each place had a title. Where I waited. Where I tested being gone. Where I saw kindness. And then, under the drawing of the hill. Where I let myself hope again. My throat closed. This wasn't just a disappearance. It was a journey. A slow test of whether the world, whether I, was still listening. Still willing to look. Still willing to remember. I held the notebook to my chest and looked out at the horizon. Dust swirled across the field below, catching the last light. Shadows stretched like reaching hands. Somewhere out there, he was watching. Not to see if I'd chase him, but to see if I'd understand why he left. And I did now. I gathered the toy soldier and the note. Folded them with care. Then turned and walked back down the hill, one step at a time. Toward home. Toward the attic. Toward the last place light was left. I didn't sleep the night I came back from the hill. I sat in the attic instead. The flashlight was exactly where we'd left it, on a crooked wooden beam near the far window, half covered in dust, its battery long dead. But it was there. Just like he'd said. I ran my thumb along its handle, remembering the weight of it in my hand, the way he used to reach for it like it was a torch from some ancient world, something that could chase shadows away. I placed it beside me, clicked it once out of habit. No light. But the gesture was enough. Morning came with pale sunlight bleeding through the slats. I heard the mail slot clink downstairs, the familiar slide of envelopes hitting the floor. I didn't rush. But when I finally picked up the small stack, my breath caught. A padded envelope. No return address. Just my name. Written in a child's handwriting. Inside, a folded note. I saw the hill. I saw you. But I wasn't ready. I don't know if I can come back yet. I'm still trying to figure out if you're real, or just really good at showing up late. My knees buckled, and I sat against the doorframe, the envelope pressed to my chest like it was oxygen. He had seen me. He had been there. I had missed him by minutes. Maybe less. But the note wasn't cold. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a pulse. A small, fragile heartbeat that meant he was still out there, still watching, still unsure, but not lost. I carried the letter to the kitchen. My wife was stirring oatmeal on the stove, moving like a ghost inside a familiar dream. When she saw my face, she didn't speak. I handed her the note. She read it once, then again, lips trembling. She folded it gently, pressed it to her chest, and whispered, "He's scared. So am I." We sat together in silence, the kind that isn't empty, but full of all the words you're not ready to say out loud. Finally, I spoke. "I think it's time I tell you everything." Her eyes met mine. I told her about the first time I left for deployment. How I came back with less than I took. Not just physically, but pieces of me I couldn't explain. How I stayed longer on my tours because it felt easier than being home and pretending I was whole. I thought I was protecting him, I said. By keeping distance. By making sure he didn't see the cracks. You made him think the cracks were his fault. I nodded. There was no defense left in me. She reached across the table, took my hand. So what now? I follow the trail. If he's leaving notes, he wants to be found. He just wants to make sure I've changed before he lets me see him again. She pressed the letter into my hand. Then go show him. I grabbed my keys, the notebook, the map from the Whisper House. Circled the hill again. Circled the rail yard. One place stood out now, a location Ben had drawn near the city riverwalk. A red X, marked with the word, Echo. I never noticed it before. It was small, hidden between sketches. But something told me that's where I'd find the next piece. I parked near the river that afternoon. The path was quiet. The water slow. A few couples walked dogs. A jogger passed. No children. Except one. A girl, maybe 8 or 9, sat near the embankment feeding pigeons. I recognized her. The thread-finger girl. From the Whisper House. She looked up at me without surprise. He said you might come here. My heart thudded. Ben? She nodded. He passed through. Left something. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small handheld recorder, the kind sold in thrift shops or school supply stores. She placed it in my palm like it was fragile. He said it was his turn to whisper. I sat on the bench nearby. Clicked play. At first, static. A rustle. Then his voice. Small. Tired. Brave. I don't know if this will make it to you. But if it does, and if you're still following, thank you. I didn't want to make it hard. I just wanted to see if you'd come after me even when it got hard. I'm still figuring things out. About you. About me. About what's real. I want to come back. I think. I'm just scared of not being enough when I do. But I remember the flashlight game. I remember your laugh. I remember your arms when I fell asleep in the car. I hope you remember me too. Click. Silence. I sat there for a long time after the recording ended. The wind picked up, scattering breadcrumbs along the trail. The pigeons flapped wildly and settled again. A boat engine hummed somewhere upstream. I looked out at the water. And I whispered. I remember everything. The vigil was held in the city square, the kind of place that used to hold festivals and farmers' markets, now filled with candlelight and faces turned down in memory. A banner stretched between two lampposts read. For the lost. For the found. For the waiting. People stood in clusters, holding photos, some laminated, some yellowed with age. Each one a child. Each one missing. Some for days. Some for decades. I hadn't come here for comfort. I came because I heard rumors that some of the runaways showed up at these gatherings, hovering at the edges, curious if anyone had remembered them enough to come look. Ben would be watching. He always watched from the outside before he stepped in. The crowd was thicker than I expected. Volunteers moved through with clipboards, handing out markers and paper hearts. I took one, hesitated, then wrote his name. Benjamin Thomas. 12. Brown hair. Too brave for his own good. I pinned it to the memory wall, a sheet of plywood strung with fairy lights, each bulb flickering like a heartbeat. Next to it, others had written messages. Come home, Maya. Still saving your seat, Joe. Love is louder than silence. I stepped back. The microphone near the front sparked to life. A man with a hoarse voice read out names. One by one. Pausing. Letting the silence between them speak louder than he ever could. I scanned the crowd. Not looking for a boy. Looking for a shadow that flinched. A shape that turned when no one else did. And then I saw it. On the edge of the square, near the art table where children were drawing, a picture. Taped to the easel. Different from the others. Two boots. Side by side. No feet in them. Just boots. Empty, facing forward. At the bottom, in thick pencil. Still marching with you. My heart stopped. I moved toward the table, slow and careful, like chasing a deer that might bolt if I breathed wrong. A volunteer noticed me. You okay, sir? I pointed to the drawing. Who brought that? She looked. Some kid. Quiet. Dropped it off and walked off. Didn't even say his name. Did anyone see where he went? She shook her head. We're not allowed to follow. Some of them are just testing the waters. I stared at the drawing. The boots weren't mine. Not exactly. But they were close. The left one had a tear near the ankle, just like the pair I used to wear when I came home from my first tour. The boots Ben had once tried to fit into when he was 5, shuffling around the living room, pretending to be me. It wasn't a picture. It was a message. I turned around. The square was full of movement now. More candles lit. Someone began playing a soft guitar. A woman read a poem about hope through a cracked voice. And then I saw it. A hooded figure slipping between people, slow, deliberate. Small frame. Green on the backpack. My heart leapt. I pushed gently through the crowd, not running. I didn't want to scare him. I didn't want this to be another moment where he felt cornered. He turned once. Just enough for me to see the curve of his face. The outline of a jaw I knew too well. Ben. He saw me. And then, he smiled. Only for a second. And vanished into the crowd again. I didn't follow. Not this time. I stood there, grounded in the weight of what that smile meant. It wasn't just recognition. It was trust. It was a test, passed. I stepped back to the memory wall and took out the flashlight from my coat pocket. The one from the attic. I laid it gently at the base of the board, beneath his name. One of the volunteers gave me a puzzled look. I just said, it's a trail marker. For someone brave. She didn't ask more. As I turned to leave, a child, not mine, tugged my sleeve. She pointed to a corner of the square where more drawings were being taped. One had just been added. A stick figure. With a flashlight in one hand. And a notebook in the other. Behind him, footprints. Small ones. Leading up to his. No words. Just a symbol drawn above it all. A circle. Not broken. Complete. I looked up at the sky, the stars poking through the clouds like tiny truths. He was out there. Not lost. Not hiding. Just watching, waiting for the last light to guide him home. And now he knew I was ready to hold it steady. The morning after the vigil, I found myself standing outside a rundown community center, the kind with faded murals peeling off the walls and a bulletin board cluttered with too many lost hopes. The sign read, Parent Support Circle, Thursdays at 9. It was Friday. But the door was open. Inside, an older woman was arranging chairs in a circle. She glanced up, didn't smile, but nodded like she'd been expecting someone. You here to listen or to speak? I hesitated. I don't know yet. She pointed to the coffee table. Help yourself. Sit wherever. There were only 4 others when the meeting began. A mother who hadn't seen her daughter since 2017. A man who'd raised a runaway, now turned counselor. A teenager who came back home, then left again. And me, a soldier, stripped of the armor that used to come with knowing what to do. They shared pieces. Pain, mostly. But also slivers of grace, the kind you only earn by staying when others leave. When it was my turn, I didn't rehearse. I'm looking for my son, I said. He's 12. Smart. Quiet. Too much like me. They listened, like the silence between us was making room. I used to think coming home was enough. That showing up every now and then meant something. But I've learned it doesn't mean you were really there. I paused. He left me notes. Trails. Not to disappear, but to see if I'd follow. One of the group members, the man who used to be a runaway, leaned forward. Did you follow? I nodded. I did. I still am. He smiled. Then you're already closer than most. After the meeting, the counselor handed me a small flyer. Kids leave for all kinds of reasons, he said. But most of them are listening, even from far away. They're watching to see if we keep trying. The flyer was for a volunteer group, one that helped reunite runaways with their families through patience, presence, and quiet persistence. I took it. Because standing still wasn't working anymore. That week, I began volunteering. Not as a soldier. Just as a man who finally understood what it meant to stay present, even when it hurt. We cleaned shelters, delivered supplies, helped with crisis calls. Sometimes I caught glimpses of children with that same guarded look Ben had in every photo from the past 2 years. I learned to recognize it, the way their eyes scanned exits first, how their shoulders curled inward even when they smiled. None of them were him. But helping them was like writing letters of my own. Ones I should have written a long time ago. And then, one night, I came home to a folded piece of paper on our porch. No envelope. No address. Just my name. In the same uneven print I could recognize anywhere. Inside. I saw you. With the food boxes. With the other kids. I didn't think you'd care about someone else's child. I thought maybe you'd stop once I was gone. But you didn't. Maybe you're really different now. Maybe I can believe it. Underneath the words, a sketch. A soldier kneeling beside a kid holding a toy flashlight. The soldier wasn't in uniform. He was just a dad. And he was smiling. I stared at that drawing until the streetlight flicked on outside. He was watching. Even if from a distance. Even if from a shadow. He was seeing who I was becoming. And then I noticed something I hadn't seen at first. In the bottom corner of the page, faintly scribbled. I think I'm ready to come home. It wasn't signed. It didn't have a date. But it was more than enough. That night, I opened every window in the house. Let the wind in. Let it move through the rooms like a promise. And in the silence that followed, I whispered the words I'd waited too long to say. Come back when you're ready, son. And I'll be here. It happened on a Thursday. No announcement. No footsteps. Just a soft knock. 3 taps on the front door, like a question too shy to finish itself. I opened it slowly. There he was. Ben. Standing on the porch, head bowed, a green backpack slung over one shoulder like it weighed 100 memories. His hair was longer now, his cheeks thinner, but his eyes, those were still his. Still my boy. He didn't speak. Neither did I. For a moment, we just stood there, the threshold between us thick with the silence of everything we hadn't said. Then, slowly, he reached into his jacket pocket. Pulled out a note. Folded 4 times. Damp at the edges. Hands shaking just a little. He held it out to me. I took it. Unfolded. You never gave up. I thought you would. I wanted you to. I was angry. But you kept showing up. Even when I didn't. So I guess. I'm here. I looked up. His eyes glistened, but no tears fell. His lips were pressed into that tight line he used to make when he was scared of being too soft. I stepped aside without a word. He walked in. Dropped his bag by the door, slow and careful, like he didn't want to scare the house. My wife was at the kitchen sink. She turned at the sound of the door. Her hand flew to her mouth. Ben didn't move. Didn't run into her arms. Didn't fall apart. He just stood there. But she crossed the room in 3 steps and wrapped herself around him, not asking permission. Not demanding a thing. Just holding him. He didn't hug back. Not at first. But after a moment, I saw it, the way his fingers gripped the edge of her sleeve. Just barely. A silent answer. They stood like that for what felt like an entire season. I sat on the stairs, letting them have the room. Letting the silence breathe. Later, he found his old sweatshirt folded in a drawer. He didn't put it on. Just held it for a while, rubbing the sleeve with his thumb like it was a texture from another life. He walked into his room. Looked around slowly. Everything was just as he left it, because we couldn't bear to change it. He touched his bookshelf. The window latch. The edge of his desk. He said nothing. But I saw him blink, just once, like a memory caught in his eye. At dinner, he didn't speak. Didn't eat much. But he sat at the table. That alone was enough to make my chest ache. He tapped his fingers once against the wood. A rhythm. One we used to do when he was little, a secret knock on tabletops and car windows, a way to say, I'm here, without making a sound. Tap. Tap tap. I looked up. Met his eyes. And without thinking, I tapped back. Tap. Tap. He blinked again. Then lowered his head, and for the first time since he walked in. I saw his shoulders relax. That night, he didn't go to bed right away. He stayed up in the hallway, sitting on the floor beside my door. I cracked it open and sat beside him, backs against opposite walls. Neither of us said a word. He handed me something small. The first note. I'm sorry I ran. Don't look. The one the taxi driver gave me all those nights ago. The paper had thinned from travel. The ink had blurred at the edges. I looked at it, then at him. His voice, when it finally came, was barely a whisper. I didn't mean that. I nodded. I know. A pause. Then. I was just afraid you wouldn't come if I didn't make it hard. I turned the note over, held it between us like a shared memory. It was hard, I said softly. But I think I needed it to be. He nodded, and for a moment, the air felt clean. Still heavy, still tender, but clean. No fireworks. No dramatic hugs. Just two people, broken in the same places, learning how to hold the pieces together again. We sat there until the hallway light flickered off. Until the silence between us stopped feeling like punishment. Until I knew, deep in my bones, that he wasn't lost anymore. Just home. Time didn't snap back into place after Ben came home. It moved like a river after a storm, slower, heavier, carrying debris that hadn't settled yet. Some mornings he wouldn't come down for breakfast. Some nights he'd sleep on the floor beside his bed, the mattress untouched. But he was here. That was enough. We didn't push. We let the silence have its place at the table. One evening, a week after he returned, I came home to find him in the garage. The door was half open, letting in the soft amber of sunset. He was kneeling beside an old box labeled "Dad, Deployment." His hands were wrapped around my boots. Not the clean pair I kept by the front door. The old ones. The pair with scuffed toes, dried mud still caked around the soles, and the tear near the left heel, exactly like the ones he'd drawn at the vigil. He looked up when he saw me. Didn't speak. Just held the boots in his lap. I sat beside him, slowly. The concrete was cold beneath us, the air thick with the scent of oil and rain-soaked earth. I kept those, I said, because I didn't know how to let go of who I was back then. He nodded, fingers tracing the frayed laces. I thought if I could fill them, he whispered, you'd stay. I swallowed hard. I didn't leave because of you, Ben. I know, he said. But I still thought, maybe if I was brave enough, you'd see me. I placed a hand on his shoulder. I see you now, I said. Not because you were brave. Not because you disappeared. I see you because you came back. He didn't answer, but I felt the shift, the way his shoulder leaned into my palm. A slow surrender. The next day, I found the boots on his bedroom wall. Not tossed. Mounted. He'd built a small shelf from scrap wood in the garage. Sanded the edges. Painted it black. And there they sat, the old boots, cleaned, laces tied neatly, standing together like a monument. Below them, he had pinned the first note. I'm sorry I ran. Don't look. But now, it was crossed out with a single line. Underneath, in his handwriting. Thanks for coming anyway. I stood in his doorway for a long time, just watching. The room was changing. Little by little, the old fear was giving way to something quieter. Drawings began to return to his walls. Not of soldiers or shadows, but of stars, maps, cityscapes, and once, a flashlight beam cutting through the dark. That night, he joined me on the porch. We watched the sky change, the horizon softening with the last light. I want to make maps, he said quietly. I turned toward him. Yeah. Not real ones. Just, the kind kids like me can follow. Ones that don't need roads. I nodded slowly. You already started. He looked at me, hesitant. I was thinking maybe we could draw one. Together. Something caught in my throat, but I smiled. I'd like that. He handed me a notebook. Blank. Except for one word written at the top of the first page. Home. 1 year later, we stood beneath a white canvas tent in the city park, the same one where the swing once hung from a bent tree, now rebuilt stronger, higher, tied with new rope. The community event was small but full: parents, volunteers, counselors, and children who had once vanished and come home again. Each wore a handmade tag with one word they chose themselves. Ben said, "Found." Mine said, "Listening." He stood near the front, nervously gripping the edge of a folded paper. The crowd was quiet, waiting, a few cell phones raised but most hands empty, still. He glanced at me. I nodded, the kind of nod that says only if you're ready. Ben stepped up to the microphone. He was taller now. Still quiet. But steady in a way that didn't come from loudness, the kind of strength that blooms after darkness. He didn't read the paper. He looked at the crowd and began speaking, slow and soft. "I don't really like talking," he said, "but I used to like disappearing even more." A pause. No one moved. "I thought leaving made you strong. Like, if no one could hurt you, no one could leave you either." He looked down at his hands. Opened them. Closed them again. "I left because I didn't think I mattered. Because it was easier to imagine being missed than being seen." His voice cracked a little. But he didn't stop. "But someone did follow me. Not because I made it easy. Not because I asked nice. But because he finally showed up, and kept showing up." He looked at me. I felt every wall inside me melt. "I still don't like the dark," he said. "But I keep a flashlight now. Just in case someone else needs to see the way." He stepped back from the mic. The tent was silent, but only for a moment, then came the quiet clapping. Not wild. Not loud. Just, respectful. Grateful. True. Afterward, a little girl approached him with a drawing. She'd sketched a map of the city. Her version. She had drawn a big X over the park, and written, "This is where I heard you." Ben took it gently, smiled at her, and knelt to whisper something I couldn't hear. Later, we walked home together. No words. Just the soft crunch of gravel beneath our shoes. A breeze tugging at his hoodie. The weight of a flashlight in his pocket. At home, he placed the drawing on the fridge. Next to it, he taped a note. Every X on a map is a place someone survived. He turned to me, suddenly thoughtful. "Can I show you something?" I nodded. He led me into his room. On his wall, just above the mounted boots, he'd hung a framed page. One I hadn't seen before. It was a letter. Short. "Dear Dad. You weren't there when I left. But you're here now. And that's what I'll remember." I stepped closer. Touched the edge of the frame. Then I noticed, beneath the letter, pinned with a small silver tack, was a paper star. Folded from the original note he'd written me. "I'm sorry I ran. Don't look." Now transformed into something else entirely. Something light. He smiled. "I don't want it to just be about running anymore." That night, I sat at my desk and wrote him a letter. No fanfare. No lecture. Just this. "You didn't break when you left. You found your way back. And now, every map we make together." I placed it under his door. No knock. Just a quiet offering. Weeks later, I saw it taped to his notebook. The same notebook he now used to design maps for the new center, the one we opened down by the old train yard. A safety hub. For kids like him. He named it the Rescue Zone. Inside, there were couches. Flashlights. Blankets. Paper. Pens. People who listened. No questions first. Just light. One morning, he left me a letter tucked into my jacket pocket. It read. I redrew the map. Nowhere is outside the rescue zone.